για τις πολιτικές της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης για την Αφρική και για το ρόλο του EBCAM, το European Business Council for Africa, δηλαδή το Ευρωπαϊκό Επιχειρηματικό Συμβούλιο για την Αφρική και τη Μεσόγειο. Το Ελληνοαφρικανικό Επιμελητήριο είναι μέλος του EBCAM, έγινε μέλος πριν 14 χρόνια και αισθάνεται πως το βοηθάει πολύ στη δουλειά του να ενισχύσει την εξωστρέφεια των ελληνικών επιχειρήσεων. Γιατί επιπλέον αποτελεί και έναν διάβλο του ιδιωτικού τομέα προς την Ευρωπαϊκή Επιτροπή. Και τώρα θα μου επιτρέψετε αγγλικά και ίσως δεν επαναλάβω τα ίδια πράγματα. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the meeting today, where we will discuss the role of EBCAM, the European Business Council for Africa and Mediterranean, and the recent developments in the policies and the measures that Europe has taken regarding entrepreneurship and business in African countries. Africa, of 54 states and 1/7% of the world population, a continent in which 8 years from now, half of the people of the world will be born there, has been for a long time a partner of Europe, especially, of course, after the decolonization. It is an historical relationship regarding political issues, economic, trade and investment, and humanitarian assistance, economic assistance and humanitarian assistance. The role of EBCAM EBCAM is a sort of a forum of the business organizations of Europe who deal with Africa. It is based in Brussels, and the president is Monsieur Etienne Giraud, whom we will hear very soon. And Secretary General is Ambassador Spachis, which is next to me, and the director of the office is also a Greek. So we have two top Greeks in the organization. The EBCAM is a sort of a conduit between the business world, the private sector, and the European Commission. We exchange information, experiences, we have cooperation, and we make proposals regarding development policy and the role and the possibilities of the private sector in Africa. It's a conduit where we pass to the European Commission proposals, problems, complaints, difficulties, and proposing sometimes solutions. As I said, we will hear today the president, and I don't take more time, and I will ask the president, Mr. Giraud, to take the floor. Etienne.
Thank you very much, Sotiris. Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So, hello everyone and everybody. I'm very happy to be here. And I note with pleasure that if two of the head management of EBCAM are Greek, three of the top management of EBCAM have a Greek name, because Giros is not very far from a Greek name, although I am not Greek, not at all. So hello to everyone and to everybody. I'm very happy to be here with you. I will take, if you give me that time, Sotiris, 5 or 10 minutes to give to you some explanations regarding EBCAM and especially our concerns and our advocacies presently. EBCAM, and for sure, Alexandros will complete this presentation later on. EBCAM means European Business Council for Africa and the Mediterranean. And very simply, it is an association which brings together other professional associations or organizations in 14 European countries, 14. This association is based in Brussels and is composed of countries belonging to the European Union, but also countries not belonging to the European Union, such as Switzerland or UK. Now they are no longer in the Union. So it's open. There is only one representative per country, which itself is the local professional organization in its own country. For example, for France, I am also the chairman of CIAN, which means le Conseil français des investisseurs en Afrique, and which is the French professional organization dedicated to French business in Africa. And it is exactly the same for Germany, for UK, for Belgium, and for all the 14 countries belonging to EBCAM. Our role is to represent the European private sector, first towards the European Union, but also towards all the European associations, organizations, institutions, states, and so on, and also towards the opinion, the public opinion, and to explain our concerns, our convictions, our thoughts, and to promote the private sector in Africa, but also to promote Africa towards the private companies and the businessmen. Because as you know, Africa has to be invested by companies. It needs a lot of infrastructure investments, and we need investments. So we have to give confidence to the private sector to invest in Africa. And to do so, we have to explain what Africa is, what are the business organizations in Africa, what are the specialties of Africa to invest in. And also we have to explain exactly the role of the private sector towards the public sector and the states and the institutions who are not always very well oriented towards our private sector organizations. So having said that, maybe Alex will explain to you other figures regarding EBCAM, but I think that we cover approximately 500,000 companies acting in Africa. And I think that our turnover is much over than 150 billion euros per year. So you can see the weight and the importance of the turnover and the economy presence of Europe companies in Africa. So let me share with you 3 main ideas we are presenting actually and currently towards the authorities. The first idea is that all the private companies, we need to facilitate the funding of the investments and the funding of the companies. There is a problem of financing in Africa, which is, in my view, related to 2 or 3 things. First, the cost of the loans is very high and very heavy, especially if you borrow in local currency. As you know, probably the cost of such a loan is between 6–7% per year towards sometimes 18 or 20%. You can imagine what is the return on investment you have to create, the gross margin you have to create to support such rates. So the first point is the price of the loans. The second point is that all the operators are requested to provide very strong and high guarantees. And if you start and begin a new business, a new job, a new activity, very often you have the guarantees to provide to the lenders, which is a huge problem. So we are advocating first to reduce the impression of risk of Africa, and secondly, to create new instruments or new tools to provide guarantees. First, the reason why the loans are very expensive in Africa is because the bankers, the financiers, the lenders are expecting high level of risk in this continent, which is true and not true. It is true because, yes, there are some risk, but like elsewhere in the world or in the planet, so no more, no less. But it does exist answers to every risk. Yes, there are risks of corruption, there are risks of payment by the states, there are risks of security, safety, military, governance, and so on. But you can find answers to every of these risks. And secondly, for the guarantees, we are advocating on the following way. We think that instead of sending money, billions to finance projects in Africa, we could take a small part of those amounts to transform them in guarantees for the private sector. And I think it would be much more useful, much more operating for the African development. So it is our first battle, if I may say, which is to modernize and to facilitate the financing of the economy of the private sector. The second thing is related to an issue that probably you are aware of, which is the compliance issue. As you know, our European companies are under the laws, are under the standards, and are under of the directives of very high level compliance behavior in Africa. This concerns, of course, the fight against corruption, but also the following of the value chain, the question of the gender, the question of the social organization, and so on. And for example, the job and the work of children, which is totally forbidden and which is very much scrutinized by the NGOs and so on. So the problem is that those laws and those rules are becoming harder and harder. And every year they are transformed and they are improved, and it is much more difficult for the private sector. For example, there is a new directive from the European Union, which now extend the scope of those laws to all the companies over 250 staff, people in their company, which is not very high. So if you have a European companies of 300 people investing in Africa, this company is under this compliance law, which is in fact not a problem for us because we are not under compliance. We are not against, we are not opposed to the compliance rules because we are European, it is in our philosophy, and I think we have to follow such rules. Our problem is that approximately 50% of half of the operators, economic operators in the world are not under those laws. Let's take the example of Chinese companies, of Turkey companies, of Indian companies, which are very hard competitors of our companies in Europe. They are not concerned by such laws. So there is a problem. It is, very simply to say, an unfair competition. So we have to be very careful not to develop laws, rules, directives, which lead to unfair competition. There is another danger or risk which is the fact that such laws give very useful and very efficient tools to our enemies, to our opponents. And for example, I think of very aggressive NGOs. I have nothing against NGOs, but as you know, NGOs sometimes give to the social networks, for example, news regarding a company in Africa. And even if this news is not right, at the end of the day, it is on the social networks and the reputation of the company is attacked, which is a problem. And such regulation regarding compliance are sometimes tools in the hands of such organizations or enemies or manipulations from other states, for example. I don't want to mention any state, but you can imagine that with the situation we are living presently, with the war in Ukraine and so on, you can have to face very dangerous manipulations. So we have not to be naive, and we have to take care of such a situation of opportunities for our opponents. And our third point I would like to mention is a point related to the European Union, but also to the financing of the company. As you know, there is a huge amount of public aid and public financing dedicated to Africa. But the problem is that we think, as private sector, that those financings are too much complicated and they are operating large bureaucratic manner. Speak Alexandros Sotiris to the European staff. They explain what is, for example, the global network. What is the name, Alex? It is a global network, no? The global, yeah, which is a huge amount of 150 billion euros dedicated to Africa in the next years, in the coming years. And we don't understand exactly what they are explaining and saying. And at the end of the meeting, we ask them, look now, is there an office, a place, a name, an organization where we can send our companies to go and to explain what their projects are, and would like to try to find financing? And the answer, no, we are not operating such amounts. You will have to go to your local assistance and funding organizations, which is a new bureaucratic way to process. And we are in a kind of race against the watch in Africa. As you know, there is a huge increase of the population. We have to battle and to fight against poverty. And so we have now, it's too late to waste time in bureaucratic manner. Do you know that in Africa, a public investment, once the ID is on the table, takes 7 years to start the first work, 7 years. So when you have 6-7% of increase of the population per year, it's much too long. So we have to simplify such operating. So these are our three battles: financing, conformity, compliance, and simplification of procedures. With your permission, Sotiris, I would like to add only a small point, which is totally in the present issues and concerns of our companies, which is a question of visas. The visa, a lot of states, yes, in Europe, are requesting visas to enter the states from Africa. And as you know, to fight against immigration and so on, the rules are becoming harder, difficult, and more strong and stronger and stronger. And it is a difficulty to develop business with Africa. And secondly, it is a problem for our European image in Africa. This is not very in favor of our image. So we try to advocate, because we understand the reason of such laws, but we try to advocate to the European Union and to our own states to simplify this procedure, and especially to let businessmen from Africa to visit Europe more easily, and also to welcome students, because if we form African students, they will know our language, they will know our way to life, they will know us, and in the future, there will be partners, friends, or customers. So it is really an investment for the future. Now, Sotiris, I don't want to take too much time. I have delivered some messages. I hope I am being clear, and I give you back the floor. Thank you very much, Sotiris, and thank you, all of you, to have listened to me. And we are waiting for you in France.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Etienne. And I would say that we are very fortunate in EBCAM to have a prominent Frenchman, Etienne Giraud, as president. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Sotiris.
I propose that we can hear now Ivano Casella, who is from the Directorate General for Trade. He's coordinator of trade relations between the European Commission and Central Africa, as far as I understand, right? Mr. Casella has the floor.
Hello, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here with you this afternoon. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Very well.
Okay, thank you. I was very interested to hear the argument, especially those that have just been flagged by Monsieur Giraud. I think there is, they are very, very pertinent and very good, that needs to be reflected and acted upon, especially the question of unfair competitions that may be rooted into compliance, that requirements that are becoming heavier and heavier. I think we need to address that in order to make sure that our main competitors do not find an advantage against us, and this is extremely important. At the same time, even if we don't want to compromise with our values, we have to make sure that we don't put our companies into an unfair position. And the same applies also for the question of that Monsieur Giraud mentioned, the question of excessive bureaucracy for disbursement and so on. We know that we have procedures that are very heavy, and we need to find ways to be more effective on the ground. I think the global gateway that was briefly mentioned is a massive investment in infrastructure that may open opportunities. But let me here, if you allow me 10 minutes, to go straight into what we're doing with Africa in terms of trade policy. This trade policy, which is run by the European Commission and coordinated by the European Commission with Africa, is rooted into a series of preferential trade agreements that have shown to be quite effective. Over the past decades, we have seen that the so-called economic partnership agreements that we have negotiated with African countries have delivered, have allowed to see our trade with Africa to increase, diversify, and have also supported regional integration. And I will go through various aspects of, in my presentation, the various aspects of our economic partnership agreement, talking about the opportunities for business, where we stand in terms of implementation of these agreements, and where we go from here, what will be the latest development and the future challenges. So let me start with the opportunities for business. So where are we in our economic partnership agreement with Africa? Obviously, they cover also Caribbean and Pacific, but I will focus only on Africa. We have two of these agreements with West Africa, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. We have a regional economic partnership agreement with SADC-IPA group, with the countries, a group of countries in Southern Africa. Now we have also an economic partnership agreement with the Eastern Southern African group of country, which is a sui generis group of countries that have decided to negotiate with us. And then we have an agreement with Central Africa. I'm focusing here only on Sub-Saharan Africa, not counting the free trade agreement that we have with countries in Northern Africa. So what are the biggest trading partners in the ACP countries? The biggest trading partners of the EU, South Africa. South Africa is clearly the top of the list. It covers 41% of our trade with Sub-Saharan Africa. And then you have Nigeria, you have Senegal, you have Ivory Coast, Ghana, Angola, and a few others. Kenya and Cameroon closing the list. So you see that with all these agreements, we have mostly taken care of at least the major of our trading interests. But this is not enough. We need to go deeper. We need to enlarge all these agreements. We need to bring more countries into this agreement. We need to enlarge the scope of the agreement to the benefits of European companies. So when we look into what are the major benefits for business into the EU, we see that export opportunities, they have improved market access for chemicals, pharmaceuticals, machinery, transport, equipment. There have been import opportunities. They have allowed cheaper inputs of materials brought to Africa, notably in the area of agriculture, agri-food, textiles. They have provided legal certainty and stability. In our economic trade agreements, we have dispute settlement provisions that have sort of given the guarantee that the agreement would be rightly implemented. And I would simply say that we have recently won a case for poultry, for the imports of European poultry to South Africa. We have won a case with the dispute settlement provisions that have given reason to our companies importing poultry to South Africa. So we have seen that, and South Africa has accepted the outcome of the decision of the panel. So it shows that our agreements are rightly implemented. They have improved business and investment environment. EPAs are negotiating in regional blocks, and they have increased the size of these regional blocks. And at the same time, we're supporting programs that are focusing on trade facilitation. And finally, these agreements have helped to supply chain opportunities. They have flexible rules of origin, and we know how these rules of origin are essential to provide also benefits for Africa industrialization. And I think there is a massive advantage now that needs to be seized for European companies with Africa trying to unify its internal market and building the largest possible continental economic market. And at the same time, we have in these agreements accumulation of origin provision that allow local supply chain to be better organized and to profit from the agreement that we have negotiated. But it's possible to do better. And that's what we are working on every day. We have seen that thanks to the EPAs,
Ivano, do you know that there is on my screen a mask on the right side of the slide?
Okay, let me try to.
There is a gray mask, approximately 20% on the right.
Okay.
Do you see it?
Yeah, I think I see it. I try to minimize it. Let me see how I can do that.
Sorry for that, but we don't see the whole.
Is it gone now?
Yes, it has gone. Thanks.
Okay. Sorry for that.
Thank you.
Okay, now I was talking about the increased trade between the EU and EPA countries. So the latest figures, we have seen that EU export to our countries in Africa with whom we have these EPAs have amounted to 41 billion euros. And EU's import from these countries to 39 billion euros. So it is massive. It is massive. When you go into further detail, many EU imports from ACP countries, mainly focusing on agriculture products, minerals, fuels. We know how this is important nowadays as we talk about critical raw materials that Europe needs to successfully manage the changes of its economy, diversification, moving away from sources of energy coming from the East. You know what I'm referring to. And we need to seize the opportunities that the African market are giving to us. And I think this is strategically become even more important. Many imports from ACP countries, commodities still represent still represent the large proportion of ACP-EU trade, but recent export diversification trends have seen that machinery and vehicle account for almost 10% of total export to the EU. So what we see, what these figures are telling us is that Africa is managing successfully to create value addition in its processing stage. And this is a novelty. We are not just relying to Africa on trade only with agriculture products, minerals and fuels, but we also see that Africa has an increased capacity to process goods and to export finished products. And I think we need also to seize that as an opportunity for our companies. When you look at the reverse trend, main EU export to African countries, you see that machinery, transportation equipment are on top of the list. And then refined oils and chemicals, pharmaceuticals are also part of that list, and the rest is animal, vegetable, and so on and so forth. So when you look at the type of agreement that I'm talking to, what do they cover? They cover trading goods. So in other words, you have a series of dismantling schemes that allow African countries to trade with the EU at zero duty. They send their goods at zero duty, and EU goods are sent at a reduced duty that takes a certain amount of time to be dismantled. So there is clearly a benefit that has been included for African countries, and that's rightly so. So trading goods are the major block of our EPAs. They provide, you have in this agreement market access provision, so you have measures for trade defense mechanism, measures regarding export taxes. We know how much that is important when we talk about fuels and energy products, that these countries in Africa are including export taxes that sometimes diminish the advantage for European companies and also for our European economies. And thanks to this agreement, we have managed to get rid of these taxes. We are talking about technical barriers to trade standards, sanitary and phytosanitary. We have joint institutions, EPA committees that allow to talk regularly with these countries. And as I said, we have a dispute settlement mechanism. And then, of course, we are not just leaving with these agreements on trading goods. We try to go deeper than that. We want to deepen these EPAs to cover all trade-related topics, such as services and investment. And I heard Monsieur Giraud about the importance of investment and bringing capital to Africa. And this is the next big issue on which we need to focus. We are talking about intellectual property rights. We are talking about competition policy, public procurement, and trade and sustainable development. And these are questions that are being debated with these countries, with a group of countries of East and Southern Africa. We are now negotiating additional provisions in these areas, and we hope to do likewise with other countries. Now, when you look into the access to the EPA markets, the trade liberalization schedule, you see, as I told you, that there is a long liberalization schedule before it becomes effective, the end of liberalization. You see that with the East and Southern Africa group, it's very soon. It's actually in 2 years' time, 2024. With the SADC, the Southern Africa Development Committee, it's up to 2028, so another 5 to 6 years. Ghana, it's 2029, Ivory Coast 2029, Cameroon likewise, and then you have, of course, more time given to our friends from the Caribbean and the Pacific. What does that show? It shows that by the end of this decade, all these countries would be in a position to trade freely and they will be in a position to liberalize completely their economy with the EU, and that will give additional trading opportunities for European companies and operators. Let me briefly talk to you about rules of origin. I mentioned those that were essential for attracting additional transformation capabilities in Africa and using imports from abroad. And this has been very sensitive because from the EU side, you have many protectionist tendencies that have shown the difficulty of negotiating ambitious provision in this regard. But in in general, we consider that there is a 15% general tolerance of inputs coming from abroad that has been accepted into this agreement while maintaining the preferential trading status. And that applies to all the EPAs that you see on the list here. And all these agreements and to benefits from the rules of origin, they are entitled to have self-certification. So in other words, operators are capable to certify the transactions that they are doing, that they are in conformity with the provision of this agreement, and this gives a lot of facility to the trading transactions. And when it comes to the sensitive area of textiles, we have given to Sub-Saharan Africa the benefits of single transformation. That is to say that goods in this area that have just been transformed once still retain the origin status. And we have seen that this has been a reason for a massive increase of textile exports from Africa to the EU, and therefore also for transactions with EU companies. I was speaking to you about the benefits of having a certain numbers of platforms of dialogues with the EPA countries. We have EPA committees, which are meant to monitor and implement the application of these agreements. We have regular forms of dialogues to discuss any issues concerning implementation, liberalization schedules, trade irritants. We discuss about basically everything that is impeding the effective implementation of trade agreements and creating obstacles to our companies or African companies. We discuss about VAT, just to give you an examples, on wine and spirits, anti-dumping duties, sanitary, phytosanitary measures, and so on and so forth. So it's a fantastic instrument that allows us to discuss also the policy that are being implemented by these countries to make sure that they don't impede the effective implementation of our agreement. Now, I would like to briefly mention the opportunities for the implementation of these agreements. They focus on enforcement of EU free trade agreements. I mentioned we have EPA committees. We are implementing market access schedules by partner countries. We have setting procedures for the effective implementation of EPAs. We are setting up monitoring civil society mechanism because we want to make sure that civil society is being consulted and knows exactly, and including civil society, also the companies actually know what that these agreements are bringing to them, the advantages. We have policy discussions, review processes, and monitoring of trade barriers. And then of course we have an ongoing work with the EU and business that gives us the possibility to explain the advantage of this agreement and also to collect suggestions on how to improve these agreements. And then I will move to the next stages and the latest development. First of all, I would like to say, as I mentioned, that we are currently negotiating deepening agreement with the Eastern and Southern African group of countries. I mentioned that we are focusing on services, investment, and sustainable development. We are also focusing on widening of these agreements, trying to include additional countries that haven't yet taken the benefits of this agreement on board. For instance, the inclusion of Angola into the SADC-EPA group of countries, but we're also maybe why not considering at some point Congo DRC to be part of the EPA that we have with Central Africa, that so far is only being implemented by Cameroon. We have engaged into discussion with Kenya. Kenya was initially part of the group of countries called the group of the Eastern Eastern African Community. And we have seen that these countries never really ratified the agreement that was initially negotiated for various political reasons, but Kenya has changed recently its views, and we are very favorably considering this variable geometry and the possibility of Kenya entering into bilateral negotiation with us. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the importance of investment and the question of investment facilitation, we have very recently concluded, just a couple of weeks ago, an investment facilitation agreement with Angola. And this is very new, and we are very proud of that. And it's going to serve us as a benchmark for a similar discussion with Nigeria and possible other countries. And of course, we have other processes that we are taking, that we're looking at. We have the possibility of reviewing the effective implementation of this agreement. We have what we call the multi-stakeholder dialogue on sustainability of cocoa. This is one area that we look into, and possibly enlarging to other key products. We are aware of the African Continental Free Trade Area. We see that there are synergies between the implementation of EPAs and the implementation of the AFCFTA, and we are very keen to increase the synergies. Just to give you the latest, just a couple of weeks ago, there was the African Union that came to Brussels, and it was agreed to establish a EU-African Union high-level dialogue on regional integration. This is the first time that we have a channel, open channel of communication at the highest possible level with the whole African continent. And this will be focusing on regional integration and trade and investment. So it will be a unique opportunity to make sure that what we do with individual countries in Africa is also fully compatible with the implementation of the AFCFTA. And then I would like to say just a few words on the importance of the new agreements that we're focusing on investment facilitation. We have seen, I just told you that we have managed to conclude one with Angola. We are considering one with Nigeria. Actually, what are the routes that have led us to go into this direction? The gap in our investment policy. We have seen that there are relevant provisions in chapters related to investment, but there is a lack of investment instrument in Africa. And we need to link it to the global gateway. The global gateway is indeed this massive 150 billion euros that has been put aside for supporting Africa infrastructure. But we need to reflect about specific instruments and agreements that will give us a leverage to negotiate better provisions and access to our companies. And we see that an investment facilitation agreement with key targeted countries could do that kind of job, and that's what we intend to do. With the context of this investment facilitation is rooted into the WTO provision on investment facilitation for development. It is online with the investment protocol of the AFCFTA, so there is no discordance between the two. And we try to move into a bilateral approach, so promoting so-called sustainable investment facilitation agreements, what we call here CFAs, plus the EPA deepening. So we would like to bring the two together. Bring the economic partnership agreements, deepen these provisions on services, on intellectual property, on competition, on sustainable development, and then in addition negotiate with targeted countries investment facilitation provisions. When you look into the content of this investment facilitation agreement with Angola, you see that it promotes predictability and transparency, which is essential for our companies, streamlines of authorization procedures. It's established focal points and stakeholders involvement. Investment sustainable development is rooted in there. And then it brings up transparency, a linkage with domestic economy, sustainable development, development cooperation commitments, and bilateral channel to raise issues. And the benefits that we hope to get from this investment facilitation agreement with Angola, it's new investors coming into the country with additional opportunities, including for SMEs. Existing investors will have above plus the possibility to comment on new measures that Angola's authorities will be taking. There will be a publication that will be done in advance, and there will be the possibility of a grievance mechanism. And for the local economy, there will be a responsible business conduct that will be tried to be implemented. So there will be a wider package that is going to create additional benefits for our companies. So I gave you here in a snapshot, what we are trying to achieve with with our partners in Africa when it comes to implementation of our trading policy. This is essential, especially since we published our trade policy review last year, where this was right in the middle of the pandemic and was put the emphasis on Africa as nearshoring and putting the advantages for European companies with our immediate neighbors. And we thought that Africa was the continent on which we needed to focus on. And that's more or less it. So I can certainly take any comments and questions you might have. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Casella. Muchas gracias. I think you gave a very comprehensive response to the critics of the EPAs. And myself, I was interested to see a comparison between those who have signed the EPAs and those who have not. What is the difference and what does it mean if you are not a member of the agreement? But that we will see later in this discussion. Thank you very much. And now I will give the floor to Mrs. Eleni Kiru, who is the head of representation of the European Investment Bank in Ethiopia and the Africa Union. Mrs. Kiru, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moussouris. Kalispera se όλους σας. Good afternoon to everyone. I think Mr. Casella was super thorough. Thank you so much. He covered a lot of ground, so that saves me from painting the ecosystem. I'll probably go a bit deeper in areas of relevance also to the work of the European Investment Bank. For those who are not that familiar with who we are, let me just give you some quick facts at a glance. So we are first of all, let me start that we are the Union's bank. We're the EU's bank. The 27 member states are our stakeholders. We're entirely owned by those member states. We're the largest multilateral lender and borrower in the world, and over 1.5 trillion euros has been invested by us since 1958. And we're headquartered in Luxembourg. Thinking specifically about our work outside the EU, between 2012 and 2021, we have financed up to 26 billion euros, a bit above 26 billion euros in Africa. And that investment mobilized 94 billion euros in its turn. The important point in that is that we don't just finance, but we really crowd in other co-investors, parallel investors, and private sector. The interesting element about the bank is that we do both sovereign and private sector lending. So we promote a nested approach in those financing investment efforts, which I find a highly attractive element in our work because that allows us to really bring together and bridge both the countries and governments in Africa, as well as private sector, both domestic and FDI that wants to step in. And a couple of points just on what we've heard also by the first speaker regarding compliance. EIB is a AAA rated entity. Essentially, our involvement in financing any operation or any corporate brings along our brand, and that's a highly desirable brand to have on board. And because of that, yes, we do have our own standards. Part of those standards also contribute to our brand. So we're very proud of upholding very high standards: environmental, social, biodiversity, labor standards, procurement standards, just to name a few. From my position here in Addis Ababa, what I would like to flag to today's audience is a couple of a few elements that I do think that they create a momentum for those in the private sector who want to step in and invest, or who they want to expand their investment activity in Africa. The first one is, and I'll start from the continent, and if I may draw as well, if I am to think of the state of play of the African Union over the 2022, we've seen the Union itself, which is essentially still an intergovernmental organization. It's not the Union that we know as European Union, but they've made a huge strides. We've seen the conversion, we've seen the establishment of AUTANEPAD, a development agency. They have their own development agency. Of course, we have ACFTA, which is set to create the largest free trade area in the world. We've seen the emancipation and a leading role that CDC Africa played in the pandemic. We're seeing the establishment of the African Medicine Agency. So the continent itself is really gearing up. And what we do hear from our African partners is, we don't want any more development and we don't want exclusivity. We're here to play business with everyone. And this is really an open call for everyone. From the EU side, what has been very notable since last year's EU-AU summit is that the EU is highly committed to that relationship with Africa, highly committed. Global Gateway was the principal, if you wish, offering by the Union to the African continent and the African leaders and citizens last year. And that commitment is really up to 300 billion euros in investments until 2027. And 2027 is just around the corner. It's 5 years from now. So we're talking about 300 billion euros. This is a Team Europe approach. By Team Europe, we mean that it's not just the Union, it's all its development financial institutions, including the EIB, BRD, and all the bilateral development banks. So this is a massive, if you wish, commitment and undertaking that is already start being operationalized. And hand in hand with that, we also see the first speaker also spoke a lot about guarantees, and the financial arm of EFSD Plus is coming in precisely to fill the gap in terms of those guarantees. So EFSD Plus is committed to avail up to 135 billion euros for guaranteed investments for infrastructure projects between 2021 and 2027. And along with that, about 18 billion euros will be in grant financing from the EU budget. So what I'm trying to, I hope I'm being clear, but what I'm trying to put out is that there is a huge convergence of goodwill and financing, including guarantees, for a project. And we need to remember, Global Gateway is not a project primarily targeting governments and sovereign investments. It's primarily targeting private sector investments. So we really want to see private sector stepping in. This is really a call for private sector to step in, Global Gateway. And it is mainly focusing on infrastructure investments, because that's what, if we are paving the way, or if we are helping facilitate a free trade area in Africa, connectivity is number one. And connectivity is really about infrastructure. We're going to see strategic corridors, and we're already seeing strategic corridors coming up in plans. So there is a lot of activity in that space, and I really hope that today's audience is already privy to that. So EIB, of course, is a cornerstone in Global Gateway. We're highly committed. Let me just quickly, because it is worth spending a few minutes on Global Gateway. The sectors that are being targeted are digital, climate and energy, transport, health, education, and research. As the EIB, we're the EU's climate bank. Couple of words on that until 2030, we have committed that we will help mobilize 1 trillion euros in climate action globally. I can tell you that a significant part of those efforts will be in Africa. Last year, our entire portfolio marked a 52% share in green investments. And by green, in our definition, is anything that captures climate mitigation, climate adaptation, environmental sustainability, and biodiversity. So this is a huge area for play, and climate action is, the Green Deal, the climate ambition of the Gateway is something that we really stand ready to support any private sector entities that want to mobilize in this field. Digital sector, equally, we have been tasked to facilitate digital connectivity both within Europe and outside globally. Our new transport lending policy came out only early this year. On health, we have played a major role as the bank in the whole COVAX vaccines, and now we are taking a leading role as well in responding to Africa's determination and commitment to own its own vaccine manufacturing capabilities. So we have been, as EIB, we have been active anything from South Africa to Rwanda to Senegal in terms of putting the seeds, financing seeds, if you wish, in terms of establishing that vaccine manufacturing capability in those countries. I'll try to keep it short, but just to say that that EU-AU commitment from the European Union towards the African Union and the continent is here to stay. And we're already seeing that, this is not just us. Today, what is concluding is the US-Africa Summit in Washington, DC. So Africa is the epicenter, whether you're looking of interest and investments, whether you're looking east, China, or whether you're looking west, us, Africa. So it is the playground of the future. I'll just conclude, if I may, with a few words from my own experience here in Ethiopia. I've been serving here since 2018. So I've seen a number of business delegations coming through. Unfortunately, not as many Greek delegations as I would like to. And if I may, I don't know, just say a few things. Obviously, having delegations coming under the auspices and the support of the government is major, but I think the the Hellenic African Chamber could also play a pivotal role in that sense. I think we do need these actors that can support those delegations to come in with open eyes into new countries. What I'm seeing from investors in Ethiopia, which is at the same time, it's the second biggest demographically speaking country in Africa, the second biggest economy. And of course, it's the last market, if you wish, that's about to liberalize, but at the same time, it carries a lot of challenges. We've just come out of a civil war. So it's not an easy space to come in. And yet, what I am seeing is investors that come with an eye to the long term, with an eye for calculated risk, not, so they are risk takers, but they come with calculated risk. And what I can assure you is that both us as European Investment Bank, as well as the EU delegation, the bilateral EU delegation in place, really hear us as anchors to these efforts. I would really take the opportunity here to flag that often we see private sector players going just to the delegation, where you can really draw a lot of interesting inputs in terms of expertise, what's happening, regulatory senses in different sectors, but you can't get financing advice, so come to us as well. This is just to say that we are, the delegation and the bank with two pillars of the same coin. With the delegations across countries in Africa, what they are doing is they're planting seeds for for coalitions, if you wish, of European private sector present in those countries. For example, here in Ethiopia, we have the EU Business Forum for Ethiopia, and that brings together all EU private sector players in the country, from your Heinekens all the way down to your more humble agro-industrial players. This is important because it carries the backing of the EU delegation. You know, both us and both the bank and the EU delegation, we can actually bring matters to the authorities, and we can support those efforts. We can question authorities in terms of ease of doing business or other challenges that are being faced by private sector players. So these are you know, just to flag that there is support over here, and there is support precisely because both on the ground and at headquarters in Brussels and Luxembourg, we acutely know that it's players, you know, it's private sector that will carry through the soft diplomacy, the economic diplomacy for the union that we want to see. I think I will stop here. Any questions? I'll be open to the Q&A section. Mr. Moussouris, back to you. Over.
Thank you, Ms. Kiro. I retain very warm and positive memories from Luxembourg. But when I was there 30 years ago as member of the board, I didn't see too many cases from Africa. So I'm delighted that Africa is high in the agenda of the European Investment Bank. As far as Ethiopia is concerned, we have Ethiopia in mind, and we expect one of our vice presidents, who is member of our board, of course, and honorary consul of Ethiopia in Greece, who was born in Ethiopia, will tell us when is the right time, along with the ambassador of Greece to Ethiopia, and your advice, we will have an event with Ethiopia, which is a favorite country for Greeks. Thank you very much. We will hear Ms. Karachristou first, and then we'll ask for questions. Ms. Thanasia Karachristou, International Business Unit. She is the leader of Business Acquisition Division of Planet.
Hello to everyone. Thank you very much for this meeting. From my side, I will try to briefly present the opportunities that the private entity has to work in the African countries through the service contracts and the development aid of the European Union mainly. So in brief, I will try to present the instruments of the European Union and the funds of the European Union in ACP countries and mainly in sub-Saharan African countries. I will try to share a presentation that we have presented. I will really try to keep it short because, you know, us, the consultants sometimes have the tend to expand. I don't know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. So very briefly, just to mention that Planet and why it is why we speak about the EU funds and the EU as a donor in sub-Saharan Africa. Planet has worked in 47 countries out of 54. In 47, yes, out of the 54 in sub-Saharan Africa. So we have carried out projects funded by the European Union, starting from a few thousand euros up to 15 million euros. From our experience in the country, I will pass the first, let's say, slides. It actually refers to the strategic documents of the European Union with the African countries. We talk about the African-EU partnership and the Cotonou Agreement that is still valid, with the main priorities, the promotion of peace, of security, the economic prosperity, and so on. Cotonou Agreement, just to mention, that covers, apart from the sub-Saharan African countries, also the Caribbean and Pacific states, and has been, the validity of the agreement has been extended up to 2023, June 2023. Hold on, excuse me, I will minimize because I think you cannot see everything. Some, let's say, data from our experience in Africa is that the European Union is one of the biggest donors in international aid. It gives 50 billion per year to help overcome poverty and advance the standing of the African countries at the global level, and is of course one of the most significant donors in Africa. Only in 2020, the EU institutions had one of the highest shares in African countries. Almost 40% of the total contribution had been provided to Africa. Now we are currently at the stage of the new programming period that covers the years 2021 until 2027 with a newly established instrument, the Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument, which in practice is a merge of the previous instruments of the European Union, EDF, DCI, and also the ENI instrument. So under a single instrument funded by the EU budget, the development assistance of the European Union is now allocated. Some, let's say, indicative instruments of the European Union are, as we said, is this NDICI. It is a European peace facility that supports peace and security and has a portfolio of 600 million to support the African Union. The European Union Emergency Fund, which initially had been established in 2015, and covers 26 partner countries across the entire area of Africa. And now it is part of the newly established instrument. Of course, the Global Gateway Investment Package that all have spoken about, so I will not provide more information on that. So the main donors in Africa are, apart from the European Commission, also the European Investment Bank, also the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, and other international donors such as the World Bank, USAID, African Development Bank, Asia Development Bank, the German funds, the French Development Agency, and so on. Some data that have came out from recent reports of either OECD or the European Union, among the top, let's say, donors in Africa the past years is, of course, the American funds, the European institutions, Germany, UK, France, and so on. Here you can see the funds allocated to Africa the last years. The data are coming from 2019, and it clearly shows that the EU institutions have a major contribution to the overall development assistance in Africa. The countries that received mainly funds the past few years are the top, let's say, the first in the list are Ethiopia, Nigeria, Kenya, and Egypt is the last one coming from North Africa. The main bilateral donors, because apart from the multilateral projects of the European Union and of the other international donors, we also have the bilateral donors in Africa. Belgium, it is clear that, let's say, Germany, the United Kingdom, and also the United States are among the main bilateral donors that are active in Africa region. The allocation of the EU aid during the period 2015-2019, we try to present it in this slide. As you may see, 37% of the funds have been allocated to Africa, which is the greatest share among all the geographical regions benefited from the EU aid. I will now try to say a few more things about the new instrument that covers the entire sub-Saharan African countries and also the South African countries, and the portfolios that have been announced already by the European Union. As you may see, during the 7 period of 2021 until 2027, 60 billion euros have been foreseen for geographic programs. The European Union already has announced the programs per country and the allocations per country, where in the following slides we will see that countries such as Nigeria, Niger, DRC, at least during the period 2021-2027 are expected to receive most of the funds, while at the bottom of the list are countries like Gabon, Botswana, Cabo Verde. Over 6 billion euros of the European Union will be allocated to thematic programs covering mainly human rights, democracy, civil society, peace, stability, conflict prevention, and other global challenges. The European Union has also foreseen more than 3 billion euros for rapid response mechanism, and there is also a cushion of 9.5 billion for other needs that may arise. Here are the main priorities of the new instrument that has been created. The priorities are similar to the previous projects. So they cover security, peace, stability, migration, inclusive growth, human development, environment, climate change, green growth, rule of law, human rights. And this slide is a summary of the funds that have already been decided to be allocated at the country level and in the different priorities that have been decided with this country. I will go straight forward to the biggest, let's say, allocation that is I think it is in Niger. Nigeria, for instance, there is a portfolio for the period 2021 until 2024 of 500 million euros to be split in areas such as green and digital economy, governance, peace and migration, human development, and other support measures. The Democratic Republic of Congo, again, is expected to receive 500 million euros, mainly under the Human Development, Sustainable Development pillars. And of course, apart from the allocated fund at country level, there are also a provision on behalf of the European Union on regional programs that covers the entire sub-Saharan Africa. Again, the amount, as you may see, is extremely high and is split in different priorities areas, but always rounding upon human development, governance, peace, green transition, digital transformation, technology, and innovation. The thematic priorities and the distribution of funds, but I have to say these the thematic priorities do not cover only sub-Saharan Africa, but it cover also the ENI East part, Caribbean, and Pacific. 1.3 billion euros has been foreseen for human rights and democracy, 2.7 billion on global challenges, 1.3 on civil society organizations, and 0.9 on peace, stability, and conflict prevention. I think I will pass very quickly through these slides. It's actually the opportunities that the private company has to participate in the external aid of the European Union. This can be either through a service contract or a supply contract or a work contract. There are different procedures followed under each type of contract and different procurement procedures. So I will focus mainly on service contracts, where in cases of very large contracts over 300,000 euros, we always proceed with an international restricted or open tender procedure. International restricted procedure is at an initial stage open to all companies that has an interest in a particular opportunity, and then the competition is restricted to a pool of maximum 8 candidates, while the open tender procedures is open to everybody. And in innovation, let's say, with the new instrument is the fact that there are no geographical barriers when participating in EU-funded projects, while in the past there were certain obstacles for companies coming from certain countries to participate in programs funded in sub-Saharan Africa. I have already covered this part. I think this is a very important slide. From our experience in the region, we have seen several advantages and several disadvantages. The advantages, let's say, when doing business in Africa, and when following EU-funded tenders, is that usually the tenders have a considerable budget and allows the companies to have a sufficient profit margin. The competition is usually lower in relation to other regions such as the Western Balkans or Turkey. There is a transparency in the procurement procedures. And of course, when a project is funded by an EU institution such as the European Union or the European Investment Bank, there is always a certainty on payments, which is a very important aspect for a private company. Nevertheless, there are certain problems. There is always a difficulty to discover a credible local collaborator. There is a bureaucracy that Mr. Giros already mentioned at the beginning. There are time-consuming procedures for traveling in countries, including the visa, the vaccination process. There is always a risk on the disease and the security in certain countries. But of course, each consultant is let's say, capable of making the right, let's say, with the support of the client, always to make the right provisions to protect the people traveling to this country. That's all. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Kalakristou. Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Ήταν πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα η παρουσία σας. Και τώρα, πριν δώσω το λόγο στον κύριο Σπαχή, ο οποίος θα μιλήσει ελληνικά, ήθελα να ρωτήσω εάν έχει ως τώρα κάποιος μια ερώτηση σε αυτούς που μιλήσανε. Στον κύριο Ζηγό, στον κύριο Κασέλα, κυρία Κύρου, κύριε Καλακρίστου. If anybody wants to ask a question from Mr. Giro, Mr. Casella, Ms. Kiru, and Ms. Kalakristou, this is the time. But because after that, we'll conclude with a statement of a presentation of the Secretary General of EBCAM, Mr. Alexandros Spachis, in Greek. So, is there any question?
I think you have raised a question right after my presentation, if I may.
Yes, I did. Yes.
So allow me to go back on that one. You were asking me what were the views of the countries that had not negotiated an economic partnership agreement with us. Well, I would say very straightforward. They are regretting it, and we see actually a change of mood. And this change of mood is triggered by different things. It's triggered by the fact that the evolution of trade, and the statistics are unbeatable on that regard. The evolution of trade between the countries that have negotiated EPAs and the European Union has been very favorable to those countries. We have seen a boost of their exports. We have seen a boost of their transformation of the goods that they are exporting. We have seen additional industrialization, capital being accruing from abroad to these countries, the capacity of these countries to further diversify their exports. So we're seeing many advantages that have been brought to countries that have negotiated EPAs. And finally, last but not least, we see that countries that so far had benefited from the status of being a least developed country are now reconsidering their situation, trying to develop a new economic model for the future, because simply they are modernizing themselves, they are developing themselves, and they might lose their LDC status, which is a status that is granted by the UN, as we all know. And because they might lose their LDC status, they might lose the simple benefits of being, you know, beneficiary of GSP and the unilateral tariff concessions. And so they are thinking about what is there outside available for their economic models to modernize their economy, to diversify their export structure, to attract investment, and EPA might very well be the solution. And that is the case in mind that we have seen it with Angola. That has shown that Angola is going to actually being graduated out of its LDC status in the next coming years. We know that Senegal might be also one country considered for that, and other countries like in Central Africa, like Congo DRC, for instance, and lately Kenya has also shown an interest. So
what about South Africa?
South Africa is already part of the EPA. South Africa is a special case. South Africa is a country that was already more developed than all its neighbors, and simply benefited from the advantages of being in a customs union with other countries far less developed than them, for negotiating an EPA that has brought many advantages. But we are not being naive with South Africa. South Africa, we have difficulties with them because South Africans are enacting protectionist policies, and these run against the EPA philosophy. So it's the only country in Africa with whom we are having difficult discussions for preserving our company's interest. So you see that there is a positive evolution for these countries being more attracted to EPAs and joining these agreements.
Mr. Casella, one more question, and to you and to Ms. Kiru. What about integration schemes in Africa? How do you see the future? And how do we support them?
Well, I'll be very brief and leave the space to Mrs. Kiru. Look, integration schemes we have seen, and we have been dealing with regional economic communities. There are many of those in Africa. And contrary to some narrative that exists out there, I'm not naive, I know that it exists, that we have heard that the EPAs have been disrupting the regional economic schemes in Africa. This is wrong. This is wrong. Actually, what we see is that countries that have negotiated EPAs have managed to export and import more with their neighboring countries, members of the same regional integration schemes, whether that is the SADC, whether that is the COMESA, whether that is the West African Community or the CEMAC in Central Africa. So we have seen the opposite. EPAs have been supportive of regional integration processes. Decisions to negotiate an EPA has been taken by sovereign countries. The EU has never imposed anything. And actually the EPAs have helped the integration processes. And we know that the challenge for Africa is now to build their continental market integration. And we are supportive of that, precisely because thanks to the EPAs, these countries with the EPA have been able to liberalize their economy. This is the experience of the EPA that cannot be matched by others. And now they are supposed to do likewise with their fellows in Africa. So those who have negotiated an EPA have an advantage that others do not have.
Thank you. Ms. Kiru?
From my end, what I can tell you is that what we do hear from the leadership of the African Union Commission is that they do want very tangible efforts, very tangible investments, very tangible schemes that will help their integration efforts. A couple of weeks ago, we had the commission to commission meetings in Brussels, and the point that I want to reiterate again, Mr. Casella raised it earlier, is that following these C2C, Commission to Commission meetings, a high-level dialogue initiative has been established, and it has been established precisely because we in the European Union, we have walked this integration path. So this high-level dialogue platform is all about how we can lend strategic knowledge about our own experience in order to support that those integration efforts of the African Union and the continent. Now, what shape or form these integration efforts will take, I think this remains to be seen following this dialogue. Thank you.
Sotiris,
Yes.
Sotiris, may I say 2 words? First, very briefly, on the regional integration, we are totally in favor of the African Free Trade Agreement. Only for one reason, I want not to repeat the comments, but only for one reason. The main reason is that we have to increase the size of the markets. One of the problems in Africa is that the size of the market is small. Let's take countries like Togo, Benin, Malawi, Zambia, and so on. They are not big countries. And so to go over the risk, the impression of risk first, and to improve the difficulties, the problem of financing and so on, it's much easier if the markets are big. So yes, the EFTA is very good and useful for that, and you are totally in favor of that. Now, with your permission, I would like to add 2 comments on what I have heard. First, the one is, I think it's Mr. Casella who mentioned the necessity to create value, added value in Africa, not only to export commodities, but to create value. I would like to, there is a condition for that. Yes, of course, we are totally all in favor of that, but there is a condition, a prior condition, which is that we have to improve and to increase the competitivity of Africa. We can repeat for years and years and years, yes, okay, create value in Africa, share the knowledge of the European companies. But if the local economy is not competitive, if there are no infrastructure, if there are not good education, if there are not access to electricity, to water, to dust cleaning and so on, there will not be competitive investment in the world competition. So that's the first remark. So we have to focus on that, the competitivity of Africa. Second point is related to the trade to and from Africa. I think it's, again, Mr. Casella who mentioned that. You showed a chart on the trade from and to Africa. I would like to explain to you, but probably you know it, that one specificity of the European companies is that very often they invest directly in Africa instead of exporting. And if you focus only on the export-import statistics, you have a wrong vision of the situation. For example, if you take the figure of the direct investment located in Africa, the first country, it's funny, is Netherlands, due to, I think, the beer, what is the beer industry? That Castel, Heineken, thank you. Heineken, Shell, and so on. That's the reason why they are the first investors. The second one is France. The third one is UK. The fourth, USA. And the fifth, China. But if you take the import-export statistics, the first or the second one is China. So it gives a wrong vision of the situation. Desperate, we have to be confident because it is our way to work in Africa. We invest directly in subsidiaries, in local plants, and it is our specificity because we know how to do it. That was my second comment. Now I stop because I don't want to be too long. Thank you, Sotiris.
Thank you, Etienne. I want to ask you to confirm that Greek members of the Hellenic African Chamber of Commerce could participate in a business mission that you organized, the French company, Siam, or
yes.
Is it so? Can Greeks participate in a mission that you are preparing to Africa?
Yeah, yes, probably yes, because you are belonging to Europe community. So I suppose yes. The answer is positive. Yes.
And I think this is the same with most of other chambers, right? Members
Yes.
of EBCAM. Thank you.
Yes.
This is a long-established practice that among the organizations that participate in EBCAM, there is somehow mutual access of the members to the events of the others at the rate of their local members. So they are treated like being member in CIAN or in Africa Ferrine or in West Africa and UK, etc.
Thank you.
Yes, the private sector is much more important than the flag.
Of course. Thank you very much. Is there any other question? If not, I want to thank you all. But before that, we have a statement of our Secretary General in Greek about the role of EBCAM and about the situation with funding from Europe. Mr. Spachis, you have the floor. Thank you very much. And I want to thank Ms. Kalakristou for a very interesting presentation, and Ms. Kirou. And of course, Mr. Gazella and our President, Mr. Giraud. Mr. Spachis now.
So it is not an invitation for the non-Greek speakers to leave. You are welcome to stay, but don't blame me if you don't understand my Greek.
Speak with your hands.
Okay, you have the floor.
So I will be speaking about funding opportunities and the contribution of the European Business Council for Africa that can make on this. Και ήθελα να αρχίσω λοιπόν λέγοντας ότι η ιστορία της χρηματοδότησης από την Ευρώπη είναι κάτι που στην Ελλάδα έχει μια περίεργη connotation, διότι επί πολλά χρόνια όλοι περίμεναν τις χρηματοδοτήσεις του Περιφερειακού Ταμείου και του Κοινωνικού Ταμείου για να τρέξουν τα έργα τους, για να κάνουν τις δουλειές τους ή τις δουλίτσες τους κτλ. Και βασικά υπάρχει μια μεγάλη διάκριση ανάμεσα σε αυτό που συμβαίνει, αυτό που συνέβη με τις χρηματοδοτήσεις στην Ελλάδα τα τελευταία 40 χρόνια και αυτό που έγινε, αυτό που γίνεται τώρα.
I will interrupt you. If you, in the end of an idea that you would present us, give 2 words in English.
At the very end, yes, a summary in English.
Okay.
Λοιπόν, ο τρόπος χρηματοδότησης που ξέραμε από το Περιφερειακό Ταμείο και το Κοινωνικό Ταμείο δεν έχει τίποτα να κάνει με τις χρηματοδοτήσεις που μιλάμε τώρα για την Αφρική. Είναι κάτι τελείως διαφορετικό. Η πρώτη βασική διαφορά είναι ότι οι χρηματοδοτήσεις Περιφερειακού και Κοινωνικού Ταμείου γινόντουσαν κατά κάποιο τρόπο. Στην αρχή με συνεργασία της κρατικής μηχανής και μετά μέσω της ελληνικής κρατικής μηχανής. Οι γραμμές του προϋπολογισμού που προβλέπουν τη χρηματοδότηση για την Αφρική και είδατε από την κυρία Αθανασία Καραχρήστου πολλές λεπτομέρειες και ακούσατε και από την κυρία Κύρου. Οι γραμμές προϋπολογισμού λοιπόν που μπορούν να στείλουν χρήματα στην Αφρική δεν έχουν καμία σχέση με αυτές τις χρηματοδοτήσεις που ήξερε η Ελλάδα. Είναι χρηματοδοτήσεις που διαχειρίζονται από τις υπηρεσίες της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, είτε από την Ευρωπαϊκή Επιτροπή την ίδια, είτε από τα Specialized Executive Agencies και ακολουθούν τελείως άλλους κανόνες και έχουν και πολύ ισχυρή βάση διαφάνειας και τιμιότητας στις διαδικασίες τους.
In English, few words.
There is a totally different understanding of the financing by European financial instruments in Greece. In the past, it was mainly the regional fund and the social fund. And now we are talking about budget lines that are totally different and managed in a totally different way.
And before it was through the Greek?
Yes, social fund, regional fund are normally done through the recipient state, through the governments, while all the budget lines we have been hearing about are managed directly by the European Union institutions. Το κομμάτι που αφορά την Αφρική, όπως ακούσατε, είναι κυρίως από την αναπτυξιακή βοήθεια. Και ακούσατε τα πολλά εκατομμύρια και τα δισεκατομμύρια. Ακούσατε ότι είναι της τάξεως αυτό που λέμε το η Ευρωπαϊκή ας πούμε, Ένωση, το Team Europe approach που ακούσατε, είναι πάρα πολλά billions per year. We are talking about some 20 to 20 plus billions per year. Big part of it είναι η Ευρωπαϊκή Επιτροπή με 16 billion per year. Αυτά τα χρήματα λοιπόν. Πώς γίνεται ο προγραμματισμός για να ξοδευτούν. Καταρχήν είναι ο προϋπολογισμός, οι γραμμές προϋπολογισμού που περιέχουν την αναπτυξιακή βοήθεια και ακούσατε ότι τώρα μπήκε και η πολιτική της περιοχής κοντά στην Ευρώπη. Το neighborhood policy μπήκε και στο ίδιο instrument. Αλλά υπάρχουν και τα άλλα instrument, αυτά που διαχειρίζονται τις κρίσεις, αυτά που είναι για τη μετανάστευση, αυτά που είναι για humanitarian assistance, for climate. Αυτά είναι πολύ μικρά ποσά που καταλήγουν στην Αφρική σχετικώς, διότι δεν είναι target για την Αφρική. Αυτά που είναι target για την Αφρική είναι κυρίως το NDCI. Αυτό πώς γίνεται η διαδικασία. Αποφασίζει η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση ποιο είναι το νούμερο, τα δισεκατομμύρια που θα πάνε τα επόμενα 7 χρόνια σε αυτή την αναπτυξιακή βοήθεια. Αυτά μετά μοιράζονται ανά ήπειρο. Τόσα για την Αφρική, τόσα για την Ασία, τόσα για την Λατινική Αμερική και ούτω καθεξής. Όταν βγει το νούμερο που θα πάει στην Αφρική, μετά αρχίζει ένα άλλο παζάρεμα, πόσο θα πάει σε κάθε χώρα. Από εκεί καταλήγουμε λοιπόν σε ένα budget per receiving country. Αυτός ο προϋπολογισμός per receiving country μετά κυρίως αρχίζει να εκτελείται κατά κύριο λόγο σε συνεργασία με τις τοπικές κυβερνήσεις. Υπάρχει ένα μικρότερο μέρος που είναι οριζόντιες δράσεις που αφορούν οποιαδήποτε χώρα ενδιαφέρεται ή έχει ανάγκη. Αλλά αυτό είναι το μικρότερο κομμάτι. Άρα το μεγαλύτερο κομμάτι πηγαίνει μέσω συμφωνιών που γίνονται με τα receiving countries. Και τι είναι οι δράσεις που είναι eligible για αυτές τις χρηματοδοτήσεις. Μα είναι οι 17 δράσεις των Ηνωμένων Εθνών. Το 2015 συμφωνήθηκε ποιες είναι οι 17 δράσεις και περιέχουν τη φτώχεια, τις γυναίκες, τους νέους, το sustainable development. Μέσα εκεί λοιπόν δεν υπάρχει πουθενά κάποιο παράθυρο, κάποιο γραφείο που να είναι ανοιχτό και να λέει στον ιδιωτικό τομέα ελάτε να σας χρηματοδοτήσω να κάνετε business. Πουθενά. Το πράγμα πάει ανάποδα. Πρέπει ο επιχειρηματικός κόσμος να βρει σε ποιο από αυτά τα παράθυρα που χρηματοδοτούνται από τους προϋπολογισμούς τους μεγάλους της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης μπορεί να κολλήσω τη δουλειά μου. The summary is that the allocation of funds by country in Africa is connected with the targets of the United Nations, and there is not a system where every country, for example, Kenya or Nigeria says, oh, I want to finance such type of private companies for such projects. It's the other way around. It is the private companies that have to find their way and identify how they can contribute to the United Nations targets by proposing their services and activities.
A plan,
and plan.
Project.
For example, in sustainable cities, it's very easy. If you have infrastructure for electricity, you have to find your way to propose your project. If you have infrastructure for public transport, you have to propose your project. If you have infrastructure for telecommunications, you have to propose your project. So there is an inverse logic of how a company has to approach the financing of the European Union in many countries, including Africa. I will not go through the list of the 17 UN actions, αλλά θέλω να σας πω η δουλειά των επιχειρήσεων και της European Business Council for Africa είναι πώς να κάνουμε λόμπι στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση για να ακούει τις επιχειρήσεις, για να έχει μια πολιτική ανοιχτής, ας πούμε, υποδοχής και πώς αυτό μπορεί να γίνει με μεγαλύτερη συμμετοχή του ιδιωτικού τομέα. Κατά τρόπο
Please say it in English because you said the word lobby, and these days it's hot.
The task of EBCAM is in part to do advocacy with the European Union institutions and explain what is the positive role that the European private sector can play in the development of Africa. That's the summary of what I was saying. Λοιπόν, τι προτείνουμε. Προτείνουμε ότι πρέπει να επιτευχθούν ορισμένα πράγματα. Πρώτα απ' όλα, οι αναπτυξιακοί φορείς της Ευρώπης και της Αφρικής να σταματήσουν να έχουν δυσπιστία για τον ιδιωτικό τομέα. Πρέπει να σταματήσουν να τον βλέπουν σαν πιθανό πονηρό αντίπαλο και να τον βλέπουν σαν συνεργάτη.
English.
He's asking me to repeat everything in English. The first step is how to convince development assistance operators in Europe and in Africa, including governments, that the private sector is not an adversary, but it is a partner that needs to work together with them. That's our first task.
Because they had some bad experience in the past.
Μετά θέλουμε να μειώσουμε τις γραφειοκρατίες και στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση και στην Αφρική, στις receiving countries.
We want to limit bureaucracy.
Reduce bureaucracy, procedures. The procedures are killing. Μετά θέλουμε καλύτερη διοίκηση στις αφρικανικές χώρες, γιατί εκεί πάνε τα χρήματα, εκεί πάνε οι επενδυτές, εκεί πάει το εμπόριο.
Better governance.
Better governance in Africa. Then the integration of the African markets. We want markets of bigger scale. Πρέπει όταν κάποιος θα πάει να κάνει μια επένδυση να μπορεί να πουλήσει και πέρα από τα όρια της μικρής χώρας που έκανε την επένδυση, αλλιώς δεν θα πάει να κάνει την επένδυση. Πρέπει να μπορεί να πουλήσει και στις γειτονικές χώρες και λίγο πιο μακριά. Μετά για τον ανταγωνισμό. Ακούσατε ήδη από τους προηγούμενους φίλους και ομιλητές τα θέματα ανταγωνισμού από άλλες χώρες. Ακούσατε για την Αμερική που τελειώνει το Africa-US Summit. Ξέρουμε ότι οι Κινέζοι είναι πολύ παρόντες, ξέρουμε ότι οι Βραζιλιάνοι είναι παρόντες, οι Ινδοί θέλουν να είναι παρόντες, οι Τούρκοι είναι πολύ παρόντες, όλοι είναι πολύ παρόντες, αλλά αυτοί, εδώ τώρα θα το πω έξω από τα δόντια, δεν έχουν τους περιορισμούς που έχουν οι ευρωπαϊκές επιχειρήσεις. Ο Κινέζος, ο Τούρκος ή ο Βραζιλιάνος που πάει να κάνει business στην Αφρική, δεν χρειάζεται ούτε να σεβαστεί την εργατική νομοθεσία εκ μέρους της χώρας που προέρχεται, έτσι. Οι Κινέζοι δεν το επιβάλλουν να σεβαστεί την εργατική νομοθεσία στην γένεια, το επιβάλλουν απλώς να φέρει κέρδος. Δεν πρέπει να σεβαστούν τις περιβαλλοντολογικές επιπτώσεις του τι κάνουν. Μπορεί να κόψουν ένα ολόκληρο δάσος και κανείς να τους ρωτήσει γιατί το έκαναν. Επειδή έχουν ευχέρεια, πολύ μεγαλύτερη ευχέρεια από τις ευρωπαϊκές εταιρείες να διαχειρίζονται μαύρα κονδύλια και μπαξίς, αυτό σημαίνει ότι μπορούν πολύ εύκολα να περάσουν απαρατήρητοι σε ό,τι κάνουν στην Αφρική.
The Greek businessmen have faced an unfair competition.
Greek and European.
European, yes, of course, from countries which are not members of the European Union. China, Turkey, Brazil, etc., who do not have to respect certain things, human rights or environment, labor relations and so on. That's the problem.
Και άρα γι' αυτό λοιπόν το European Business Council for Africa προσπαθεί να προάγει την ιδέα ότι θέλουμε στις χώρες της Αφρικής πρώτα πολιτική, οικονομική και επιχειρηματική σταθερότητα προτού καταφέρουμε τους ανθρώπους μας να πάνε να ρίξουν τα χρήματά τους εκεί πέρα. Θέλουμε να βοηθήσουμε επίσης την επαγγελματική εκπαίδευση, διότι αυτή τη στιγμή πολλοί πάνε να επενδύσουν και δεν βρίσκουν χέρια, δεν βρίσκουν ανθρώπους που μπορούν να τους κάνουν τις δουλειές. Θέλουμε να μειώσουμε τους επιχειρηματικούς κινδύνους, όχι να τους εξαλείψουμε, αλλά να τους μειώσουμε και ίσως και εκεί θα μπορούσαμε να βοηθήσουμε δημιουργώντας κάποια instruments που κάνουν risk mitigation. Και τελικά θέλουμε να βοηθήσουμε να αυξηθεί η ποιότητα των προσφερωμένων αγαθών και υπηρεσιών από τους Ευρωπαίους στην Αφρική, γιατί αυτό είναι η καλύτερη ετικέτα για να μπορέσουμε να έχουμε ένα βιώσιμο μέλλον σαν επιχειρηματίες στην Αφρική. Σε διαστολή με τους Κινέζους που δεν έχουν πάντα την αίσθηση ότι έχουν καλύτερη ποιότητα ούτε στα προϊόντα τους, είτε στα έργα της υποδομής που εκτελούν, είτε σε οτιδήποτε άλλο. Και το European Business Council for Africa πώς θα κάνει αυτά, αφενός κάνοντας advocacy στις Βρυξέλλες, αφετέρου κάνοντας advocacy όσο μπορούμε με τις αφρικανικές χώρες, αλλά επίσης δημιουργώντας networks of enterprises, networks of chambers, and networks of helping find partners for business and for cooperation. And this was the summary of what many others have said earlier today.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ και ήθελα να ακούσω αν έχει κανείς καμιά ερώτηση πριν κλείσουμε μια πολύ επιτυχημένη και ενδιαφέρουσα συζήτηση. Ακούω.
Questions. Any further comments or contributions or questions?
Just a comment from my side, if I may.
Yes, of course.
A quick commentary on the remark you made, Mr. Moussouris, just after my intervention. Basically to say that early this year, the bank, the EIB, created a dedicated branch for its non-EU business. And this marks a major commitment from the bank. In fact, we're responding to the instructions of the Council of Ministers for that. This will mean more footprint, a bigger footprint on the ground. That dedicated branch is called EIB Global. And just to say that in Africa, and I'm not speaking just of Sub-Saharan Africa here, I'm looking at the entire continent, we have 9 offices. We have presence in Cairo, of the Northern Africa, in Cairo, Tunis and Rabat. Then Western Africa, we have in Dakar, in Senegal, and Abidjan, in Côte d'Ivoire. We have a presence in Yaoundé, in Cameroon, a regional office for the entire Central Africa. We have an office in Pretoria, which is covering regionally all Southern Africa. Then we have Addis Ababa, which covers bilateral Ethiopia, as well as the bank's relations and representation to the AU, to the African Union. And finally, we have Nairobi, which used to be a regional office, but it's been upgraded under the new development branch. It's been upgraded as the first hub. And we expect 2 more hubs to come up next year. That's going to be, so Cairo will be upgraded to a hub, and Abidjan is going to be upgraded to a hub. I just wanted to make this remark, both in terms of, to respond to your remark about how the board of EIB was looking at non-EU business 30 years ago, so we've moved on, but also to reassure interested parties that we have a reinforced presence across the continent, and they really shouldn't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you so much for the event. It was a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you, Ms. Kirou. Έχει κανείς άλλος? Ήθελα να πω...
Only one remark.
Yes.
It seems to me that Mr. Spakis speaks an excellent Greek.
Absolutely. But I'm afraid that some of the things he said in Greek, we didn't hear it in English, but anyway.
It's okay.
It's okay. I think I am very pleased for this discussion today, because I always thought that our Greek friends, members of the Hellenic African Chamber of Commerce, or those who are not yet members, do not know enough about what the EBCAM is doing. Actually, a few years ago, when I was also president, Mr. President, I was president of EBCAM for a year. We had a meeting of the EBCAM in Greece, and there was an opportunity for the government also to see what EBCAM was doing, and many businessmen who followed our discussions there. I am happy, and I think I had a good idea to have this discussion today, and I think all of us learned something, including me, who for years have been involved with Africa. And once 40 years ago, we tried to have a common market in West Africa, but it was too early and we were too ambitious. Thank you very much, and we will be in touch with you. Mr. President, Mr. Etienne, thank you, especially you, for being with us. And Alexander, too. Thank you very much.
Thank you for you. It was a good opportunity to explain what you are doing in EBCAM organization. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a
Thank you very
pleasure.
much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good evening.